Welcome! Today we're gonna build a $700 gaming PC with mostly new parts. Let's begin with the motherboard. This is a B760MA from Asus. We got it in an open box condition for about $68. This motherboard came in its original packaging along with all of its accessories. I honestly wanted to do the first unboxing in the video, but I decided to test it before I started building the PC because, as you guys know, there has been some stuff going on with Intel LGA 1700 CPUs, so I wanted to make sure that everything worked properly and the BIOS was up to date as well. I've had and still have some rare scenarios with Asus motherboards specifically where they give CPUs way too much voltage for no apparent reason. So the first thing that I did was to update the BIOS. Then I went into the operating system and did a bunch of stress tests to confirm that everything was working as intended. Anyhow, the CPU that I went for in this build is i5-12400. It's a great CPU and it's starting to become my go-to choice for mid-range budget PCs. We paid $125 for it. We'll be cooling it with a Deepcool AG200. It's an extremely budget, but at the same time, an amazing CPU cooler. I thought that I would need to go for something bigger, but apparently this CPU cooler is enough to keep this i5-12400 under 66 degrees in Cinebench R23 all-core stress test. We bought this cooler for $12. Normally, I would have applied my GD900 thermal paste onto the CPU, but this CPU cooler came with its own thermal paste pre-applied, so I just went with that instead. For the storage, I chose this 512GB M.2 NVMe SSD from X-Ray Disk. It's a budget Gen 3 SSD that I purchased when it was on sale for $25 US. We'll be installing it in this top M.2 slot under the heatsink. And while we're at it, let's talk about the correct way to install and cool an M.2 SSD. The stickers that you see on these SSDs are actually thermally conductive and you shouldn't remove them. And if your M.2 SSD has no chips on its back, you should always install this small pad onto the already existing cubicle pad that will always be located under the M.2 slot. The only reason why you're required to do this is so that you don't bend your M.2 SSD, because when you screw it down, the motherboard heatsink will push it down and make it bend downwards. And to stop that bend, you should always install the extra pad to elevate the already existing one. For the case, I went with Darkflash DLM200 that had 5 120mm Infinity style fans pre-installed. For now, let's leave them like that, but later on I'm gonna show you guys what I changed. This case along with its fans cost us around $40. Now you might say that it's suspiciously cheap, but it actually has a bit of backstory. Someone bought this case along with its fans for about $100 US. For some reason, they thought their ATX motherboard would fit into this M-ATX case, which it didn't. They also thought that they could connect those 5V ARGB fans to their motherboard without the 5V ARGB header, which they couldn't. So they were basically left with a case and fans that they couldn't use. Now, I knew how expensive these things were, and even though the guy was selling them for $60, which is like $40 less than what he bought them for, I just ignored it at first because I can buy similar stuff for way less. And knowing my market, nobody's gonna pay me extra if I build a PC in this expensive case. So I just let it sit for a few days. After which the buyer actually contacted me himself because he knew that I build PCs, and long story short, he gave it to me for $40. The power supply that we'll be powering the system with is none other than Deepcool PF500. At this point, I think I've bought around 50 of these power supplies, and I gotta say, they are pretty much perfect in every way. I have not had any issues with any of their models, and I think I'll continue to buy them as long as Deepcool continues to supply us with their power supplies. We bought this particular model for $40. For the RAM, we'll be going with a 32GB kit from Team Group clocked at 3200 MHz. We paid $50 for it. I've ordered dozens of items from this brand as well. Whether it was budget or not so budget product, all of Team Group's items were perfect in every way. and of course the star of the show, RTX 4060 Ti. Let me tell you how I got this GPU. One day I was browsing the market at around 2 AM and I saw a listing of this 4060 Ti that someone posted like an hour ago, and there was no way for me to go there and visit him at 3 AM. So I woke up the next day, sent him a message at 8 AM and told him that I'd give him a call at 10, which I did, but he didn't answer. So I waited for a few hours, maybe he was asleep or maybe he already sold it. I couldn't tell. But he actually called me at around 12 at noon and told me that he still hasn't sold the GPU. Hearing that news got me extremely excited, because we not only scored the best deal of my career, but we also found the last component to finish building our gaming PC. Once I got there, the guy even showed me the check and the date that he bought this GPU on. And it turned out that he bought this RTX 4060 Ti like a week ago and he wanted an upgrade, I guess? I honestly didn't ask too many questions because I really didn't want the guy to change his mind. The 8GB models of these 4060 Ti's go for around $500 to $600 here, and this guy was selling it for $300. At this point I was waiting for the guy to say something like, oh, there's a faulty fan or the temps are high or something, but no. The GPU was honestly perfect. He even let me test it and play games on it. So I took it home, tested it, and it was indeed in a perfect condition. I honestly couldn't believe just how great of a deal I just scored. And before we move on to the gaming benchmarks, I wanna show you guys what kind of changes I made at the last minute. Ideally, I like to install 2 fans at the top, but since we only had one, I decided to remove it altogether. Now I could have added a 240mm AIO, but this CPU is extremely easy to cool, and while I was making this decision, I got contacted by someone that was looking for a PC for around $8,000, and they wanted it fast. They also asked me to add a bit of extra storage, which I added a TB of SATA SSD that I bought for $40, which basically rounds up our investment to $700 US. I really wanted to test this PC in many games and take cool pictures of it, but the buyer said that he was in a hurry and he wanted the PC as fast as possible. So I made sure to speed up the building process and I literally finished it 30 seconds before his arrival. And once he came here, I could just tell how excited he was from the way he was looking at the PC. I don't get this much profit from building PCs too often. I always try to build the best gaming PC that I can with the least amount of profit, which can be wrong, because at the end of the day, I gotta make a living from building PCs, since this is the only thing that I do. And I love it, and if I get to see a smile on the person's face, that is honestly all that I can ever ask for. But anyhow, it is time for us to take this PC for a spin and see if it can play games on the highest settings at 1080p resolution with ray tracing enabled.